In Walmart's Who Newville, joy started to grow. For online-only savings sure to steal the show. Tech treats and toys so dazzling and new. Walmart Cyber Monday deal soon ready for you. It's online only with very little time to spare. December 1st will soon be here, so be sure to be there. The Who's are prepared. Are you ready too? A day packed with savings. Amazing! Who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
'Tis the season for all your holiday favorites, like A Very Jonas Christmas Movie and Home Alone on Disney+.
Should I burn down the joint? I don't think so.
Then Hulu has National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
We're all in for a very big Christmas treat.
All of these and more streaming this holiday season. And right now, save big with our special Black Friday offer. Bundle Disney Plus and Hulu for just $4.99 a month for 1 year. Savings compared to current regular monthly price. Ends 12/1. Offer for ad-supported Disney Plus Hulu bundle only. Then $12.99 a month or then current regular monthly price. 18 plus terms apply.
A record-breaking last 12 months, some remarkable achievements from World Cup podiums to World Championship medals. All this from the British Park and Pipe skiing and snowboarding team. And all ahead of the 2026 Milano Cortina Winter Olympics. I'm John.
And I'm Michael. So, what's happened? How has the freestyle team on snow developed? And what's been the secrets behind their success? In this special episode of Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy with GB Snowsport, we find out.
I am Ben Kinnear. I'm the head snowboard coach for Freestyle Snowboard, or Park and Pipe Snowboard, as we call it.
And I'm Jamie Matthew, head free ski coach. So Ben's counterpart, but on the ski side. We obviously are directly responsible for the athletes, being the head coaches. Interactions daily, often hourly this time of year, with lots of stuff going on. So we're responsible for setting the training plans, delivering the training plans, liaising with sports like strength and conditioning, nutrition where relevant, program managers who help us book the extensive travel itineraries that we have to follow. But I think our job entails quite a bit more than just the technical coaching side.
I'm trying to imagine it written down as a job description. It's there's a few headlines there, but I think the reality is, like Jamie says, it's kind of everything, you know. And really, I'd summarize it all by just trying to create, you know, the best environment for the guys to flourish and to train, and to obviously be as prepared as you can be for the different comps that we're going into at this time of year.
Both of you are freestyle coaches, and that does bring a different kind of feeling, culture. How much technique do you guys work on compared with how it feels?
Ultimately, I would still argue we're technical coaches first and foremost. There's an awful lot more that comes with it, and I think you touch on it. It's essentially a freestyle discipline, so the judging is subjective, and with that comes this freedom of creativity that the athletes bring to the table, and really it's our job to help translate that into a competitive format that still, you know, stands them out as unique, but gives them the best chance to essentially score the best possible score they can in contest.
Yeah, the freestyle element, you know, in most sports that headline is attributed towards, there's an element of lifestyle. And I'd say, you know, our sport, the high performance part has almost been dragged out of the lifestyle attribute of the sport. So I think, you know, we also have to be mindful of how we approach that. You know, we can't just be completely neglectful of the fact that, you know, there's significant, you know, culture, you know, elements attributed to the sport as well. So it's, as Ben said, it's a bit of a juggling act, trying to take this hodgepodge, you know, artistic aesthetic and sort of fine tune it towards what we know the judges loosely score on.
And you find as well that just recently, actually, the judges themselves, because, you know, it's quite a small community, we tend to travel around, you know, a couple hundred people between all the athletes and staff and judging. And they actually host now workshops where they actually welcome rider feedback, coach feedback to try and help steer them as a panel on where they want the sport to progress in terms of where things are rewarded and how they're rewarded. We're trying as we can, or as much as it's possible, to push the direction that the majority want to do it. There's not a fixed score attached to every single trick. Even this workshop that we've just been through over the last month, it's not that it's unanimous. It's not that everyone's just agreeing, right, that trick is worth this much. It's much more of the judges listen, they contribute, they give good feedback, so do the coaches, so do the riders, and there's a general consensus reached. And I think probably the best way of illustrating that is that certainly within snowboard, I mean, Jamie can speak to ski, which I think lately I would argue has probably been even more difficult to get right. Is, for example, there's some slightly unique axes that some of the riders have been doing over the last year. Potentially not as big a rotation. Typically, you know, the bigger the rotation, the bigger the score. But one or riders that are beginning to do slightly unique combinations or axes are getting rewarded quite highly. We agreed as a community that as they become more commonplace, as more and more people learn that, the rewarded score starts to drop down. There's always that then incentive to be the rider that finds something a bit unique and a bit more technically challenging and that no one else is doing, and you'll get the reward with that.
On the ski side, we can generate more power and rotation and bigger spins and flips, etc. on the takeoff. Just the nature of having our feet not strapped together. You know, it's much easier as a biomechanical, you know, basis to take off that double foot rather than the snowboard style is a bit more difficult. So we're probably slightly further ahead in the technical attribute. And what we've seen recently is, especially with the explosion of reduced risk facilities such as airbags, where, you know, all the best riders in the world now go to train. There's such a huge multitude of variety across the board that the judges sometimes struggle to sort of balance like for like, because ultimately that's the subjective part is, you know, they've got to take a body of 60 riders and sort of filter that down to 10, 12 or 16 finalists, depending on the format. And they do that by, you know, direct comparison, run to run. So although it's not head to head, the way they sort of set the scoring system is they'll watch the first 4 or 5 riders and amongst themselves sort of figure out where each of those riders rank. And then every rider after that directly gets above, below, in the middle. So it's quite a fluid system for them. And historically, that's been a lot easier when the parameters of the technical, you know, rotations and tricks that we're seeing were narrower. Now, as it gets wider and wider, obviously the judges have a much wider body of work to try and contrast, compare, and figure out exactly who ranks and where.
I guess for the general viewer here, if they haven't really watched a lot of big air or slopestyle skiing and boarding, there's a lot of different variables that the athletes are contending with week in, week out. The courses are completely different week in, week out. So where they're training to where they compete in terms of the jump size and angle and the rails that they're using do change a lot. So, you know, that gives us more variety to play with, which as athletes and coaches is a good thing. We also have weather to contend with, and quite often we'll be at a contest where the window for getting that competition done is relatively small. So more often than not, it's pushed in, let's say, less than perfect conditions, which again is another factor. So it all points towards why judges can't simply give out one score for one trick, because week to week, the feature that they're doing that trick on and the weather conditions that they're doing it in, and like Jamie says, the way that they have to compare like for like or rider to rider, mean that score just has to change to reflect how difficult it was that day in their opinion on that course. So in other words, you're just dealing with like a whole heap of variety week in, week out that I think ultimately keeps it quite exciting and quite interesting for the viewer, but also potentially quite difficult to understand if you're a first-time slopestyle watcher.
And I think it's really interesting what you've said there about the fact that it can change so much from one location to another competition, and it shows then the success that you with your athletes have had in the last few years since Beijing. I think it shows how impressive that is. Both of you work particularly, I know, with Mia Brookes and Kirsty Muir, and Kirsty's been on this series already, Jamie. The comeback that she had to return to World Cup podiums, do you then talk to her about the expectation that brings? Because now we're talking about her being a potential medalist at the Olympics. How do you guys deal with that?
We acknowledge it, because ultimately that is the objective. You know, every athlete on our program ultimately is in it because they want to do the best they can, which, you know, is top step of the podium. The Olympics is no different. obviously it's a much bigger spectacle, given it's once every 4 years. There's a lot more eyeballs on the sport. So we're definitely mindful of that, but our approach doesn't really change, because we've seen in the past, if you make it too much of a big deal, because we are such a, going back to that original point, a lifestyle-based sport, if you get away from that too much, it can often cause, undesirable tension, anxiety. At the end of the day, we just view it as the Olympics. Yep, great. It's a really big, exciting goal to try and chase down, but that our processes don't really change from, say, the regular World Cup or X Games, or even, the athletes' personal technical goals and achievements they want to unlock.
Ben, does that mean that when you're working with the athletes, you're working as much on their kind of technique and physicality as you are on the mental and the psychological side of the coaching requirements?
Yeah, I'd say obviously it's individual, and I think there'll be times in any athlete's career where one of those aspects potentially becomes the main work on, or the biggest focus. But they're all relevant for each athlete at all times. And I think, like Jamie was getting at there, we look at the Olympics this year. It comes every 4 years. It is a major event. Like Jamie says, we've got lots of other eyeballs on it. It's a great opportunity for the athletes to gain a new audience. And but equally, it doesn't really change in terms of what the approach looks like, because 2 weeks before the Olympics, we've got a couple of the athletes at X Games, and that's, in some opinion, that's just as big an event. It happens every year, but in terms of us building tricks and building an athlete to be ready, then it's really just about peaking into this time of year, and picking and choosing the comps that we know are going to get them as sharp as possible to be in the best place going into January, February.
When we speak to a lot of athletes in a lot of sports, they talk about the Olympic Games is the pinnacle.
Yeah.
It is the date they have marked in their calendar. But I've always had the impression that it's not quite the same in your disciplines. It's not quite Olympic final is the be all and end all every 4 years.
Look, it's not that anybody wants to kind of poo-poo it. It's more, I think it's very individual, first and foremost. And I think ultimately, if you just look at the history of our sport and where it's come from, the Olympics is still relatively new in the lifespan of that sport as a discipline. It's almost quite a nice balance we have now, where everybody takes it seriously. It is a big deal. It does ultimately underpin a lot of what we have to do as a governing body to satisfy funding criteria. But in terms of the athletes, I think they see it as a really good opportunity. They all take it really seriously. It's a big deal, but at the same time, it's not the be all and end all. Like I said before, we've got X Games a fortnight before. I know Mia will be focusing just as much on having a run ready for that event as she will for the Games. But that doesn't necessarily take anything away from the Olympics. It just means that you've almost got these other opportunities to shine and to kind of put what you want to put out there on the biggest stage.
And Jamie, does that mean then that your athletes are not defined by what they do on the Olympic stage? And also, I guess, why we see this great camaraderie between athletes who are competing against each other, because I spoke to Kirsty, and she's as happy when one of her competitors lands something as she would be herself being on the podium. And that feels quite unique as well.
Yeah, I'm fortunate. Milan will be my 4th Olympic cycle. And I think to have, that longer term overview of where we've come, as Ben alluded to, we're still relatively new in this Olympic journey. But one thing that has become apparent, over the last 4 games is you can have, the best plan, be the number 1 ranked athlete coming into that Games. All it takes is a gust of wind or a bit of ice in the takeoff or some unknown, uncontrollable, and that's it, run over for you. And you might have won everything there is to win in the 4 years. But then that Olympic, medal has gone. And I think the riders, having seen that, over the years, it helps just drive that narrative that, yes, it's one of the big ones that everybody wants. Of course it is. But as you said, it's not necessarily a career definer in our world. There is, as Ben's alluded to, lots of other opportunities that some in the industry would argue are just as important, just as vibrant. X Games being a big one. Winning the Crystal Globe, which is obviously for the overall points tally for World Cups. I think within that, there is that shared camaraderie, because everybody who's involved in the sport, athletes first and foremost, but equally staff, we all intimately, get to witness just what goes into landing a competitive ski or snowboard run with the highest stakes. And I think because it's not an exact science, because there are so many variables, because it's not a given, there is an element of just that communal strive to be as good as they can be. And again, you can't understate there is an artistic dimension to this. There's an expressive, hugely expressive dimension to this. And I think the Olympics is a big draw on the community as a whole to try and express that in the best possible way to the wider public who maybe don't have eyeballs on our sport other than once every 4 years.
You talked about the camaraderie, and I think these guys all train together week in, week out too. Very few have their own private setups. Jamie talked about the landing bags, the airbags, and I think that's one or two nations perhaps have a couple of private ones, but in the main, 90% of the time, the guys that are competing against each other also train together week in, week out. We've just been in Corvatch in Switzerland for 3 weeks, and pretty much the entire World Cup field is all there in the same course, figuring things out, learning new tricks. So it's very difficult for anything to be kind of hidden or behind closed doors because everybody knows sort of intimately what other tricks riders are working on and what they're doing, and if they've had a crash in that trick or how often they're doing it, which again probably shows in competition. Just it's not that they aren't fiercely competitive, because they definitely are, but there's still a respect and an understanding about what it's taken for a rider to get that trick and to deliver it in a competition. They're watching each other week in, week out.
Both of you talk about camaraderie and the athletes supporting the other athletes, and I totally understand that and get that. And Kirsty talked about it, as Michael said, and I see it. But as head coaches, you really don't want the other athletes to be doing that well, do you? Really? As a head coach, it could affect funding, it could affect your prospects. Is it the camaraderie where you can be excited for another country's athlete?
I do think they can both exist at the same time. Honestly, knowing the guys, they are fiercely competitive. Not just our crew, everyone that does this. They wouldn't have chosen to do it for any other reason, So that is ultimately there, the desire to do as best as they possibly can and to essentially beat everyone else. That is definitely still there in their being. However, like I say, just given the way that our sport works and the way that progression happens, the excitement of someone else landing what to them is a first or the most difficult trick they've ever done still can exist alongside that desire to still best them and to kind of outrank them. But I think ultimately the respect is such that if that trick gets put down, and let's say it's a world's first, like Jamie was saying earlier, the progression doesn't stop, it just keeps on going, then I think there's just a really healthy respect as well for that. And I think nobody feels wronged if that person ends up outranking them on the day because they've done a world's first and they've done something that we all know to them is the best they've ever done. And I think those things can exist side by side.
Yeah, you could argue it'd be nice if all the stars aligned and we had an easy go of it, but that wouldn't be sport. That would be exciting. If it was easy, more people would choose to do it. We're lucky on the ski side of the house. We've talked about Kirsty a little bit. Kirsty is a prime example of an athlete who rises to the occasion of, if her peers round about her take it a step forward, that energizes her, that invigorates her to be like, all right, you've shown me your cards, now I'm going to show you mine. I do genuinely believe some of the best results we've ever had as a program, but equally as a sport, come from those hot pots where 4 or 5 athletes all of a sudden in the same place at the same time firing, and they just ebb and flow. And it's that classic one-upmanship that ultimately, drives the sport forward, but, makes it a great TV perspective for the audience at home as well.
So, Jamie, here we are. Last couple of questions then from me. A few weeks out of the Olympic Winter Games. Is the hard work all done now? Is it just a case of getting the guys to the start line, finessing things, or could we still see some major developments over the next few weeks?
Yeah, I don't think the work is ever done because the sport, I've stopped trying to second guess ceilings. Every time I think, the sport naturally progresses and ebbs and flows. And every time, over the years, I've thought, all right, we feel at a place where it feels good now, things are going to slow down. It inevitably, hits 5th gear and takes off again. So from that perspective, I don't think the work's ever done. We obviously We've been given a 3D model of what the Olympic course looks like. Again, there's an element of speculation as to run plans and what we think may or may not work within that. There's always, variety to add in extra bits. And I think those that have been successful in games or major events over the years are the ones that come in with the most additions, the most variety they can add to their sort of loose run plan. And that covers off any, eventuality conditions wise. So yeah, look, most of the work has definitely been done. I would be lying if I said, yeah, we're going to go away and learn, 10 different new things. But there's always, little nuances that can be incorporated or worked on or changed. So from that perspective, it's not job done, but we're getting close to it.
So final question from me then. We'll start with you, Ben, because I'd like to hear both your views on this. But how are you feeling ahead of it all?
Genuinely pretty excited, actually. Unlike Jamie, we've just both worked at different athlete levels over the years, and I've been involved a long time, but this will actually, just through circumstance, end up being my first games. So although I've been to pretty much every other comp there's still that kind of looking forward to something a bit new. You can hear about it, you've watched it, you've spoken to all the athletes and coaches that have been before, but I think just going and being part of that is going to be just something I'm looking forward to, which is cool. It is an exciting opportunity. And I think I speak on behalf of the athletes too. We, on the snowboard side at least, have a number of athletes who are looking pretty good, and in terms of their qualification, and it will for all of them be their first games. And I think that's just something to, as a program, as a team, look forward to, it being a new environment and something to sort of thrive in. And I think the biggest thing I'm sort of sensing from the athletes is more, I think we touched on it earlier on, just new audience, lots of eyeballs. It's the opportunity to kind of, just go and actually show what you do. And we do it year in, year out, month in, month out. But I think to sort of show that to the world is something to look forward to.
And Jamie, not your first rodeo, but is the excitement there, the butterflies there?
Absolutely. From a coaching standpoint, I guess you could argue the attraction of the Olympics is because it's that one time every 4 years. You kind of want to do everything in your power to get it right for that one time, because, whilst we have the luxury of a multitude of other competitions throughout the year to, this week didn't work out, we'll go again. 4 years is a long time to wait. And, for some athletes, they might not have another 4 years, just age and stage. So definitely excited. We, on the ski side, have some athletes that have qualified, and we have some athletes that are still trying to qualify. And just the nature of the window that we operate in, that won't be determined till a week before the games. That is final cut-off point. So still work to be done from a team perspective, but yeah, everybody's enjoying the challenge, and I'd like to think we'll show up and show the world exactly what we can do.
Well, absolutely fantastic insights from the team behind the team. Jamie Matthew, head free ski coach, and Ben Kinnear, freestyle snowboard coach at GB Snowsport. Thank you very much for talking to Anything But Footy.
Pleasure, guys. Thank you.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.